Today's daf is daf Nun Tes. And we start with the Mishnah on the top of the Amud. And the Mishnah is going to enumerate those Menachos that require Shemen, Levona, all told 10. Yesh Tu'unos Shemen Ulevona. So we're going to have first a list of Menachos that require both Shemen and Levona. Yesh Shetuno Shemen V'lo Levona. Levona v'lo shemen, lo levona v'lo shemen. So we have these four different classifications. V'elu te'unos shemen ulevona, which menachos require both shemen and levona, and we have a whole list over here. Just give me a second, sorry. So we have now number one, the Minchas Hasoles. Now, the Minchas Hasoles is sort of like your archetypal mincha. It's made of fine flour, and we add both shemen and levona. And anyone who, let's say, takes upon himself binidava to bring a mincha, then we automatically classify it as a minchas soles. Then we have a machvas, which we said was like that flat pan, kind of like a frying situation. And then we had a minchas marcheshes, where it gets a little bit more doughy. Then we have chalos and rikikin. This is what we call a minchas ma'afeh, which subcategories into two. One is chalos, and the other is rikikin. And we're going to see later on in Machlokas Tanoim about this. But now we're talking about a person who took upon himself an nedava to bring a minchas ma'afeh, and either he brings chalos or rikikim. And this is all in Vayikra Perik Beis. And we're talking about matzos, which are called chalos, and rikikin, which are oven-baked wafers. And again, we're listing all those menachos that need both levona and shemen. Minchas kohanim, and this is a bit of a chiddush, because Minchas Kohanim is a little bit unique in the overall constellation of Menachos, insofar as it's Kula Kolil. It's completely burnt on the Mizbech. There's no Shirayim. And you might have thought that maybe, insofar as it's such a unique carbon, a unique mincha, I should say, therefore maybe it doesn't require both shemen and levona. Yeah, mazel tov, mazel tov. Okay. Yeah, yeah, Binyamin called me. I'm in the middle of Daf Yomi. Okay, bye-bye. Mazel tov. Okay. Okay, next we have Minchas Kohen Mashiach. Okay, so this is the mincha of the Kohen Gadol, and we know it as Minchas Chavitin. And then the Mishnah adds two categories here, which l'chora seems totally unnecessary. Minchas Oved Kochavim. I don't know why you would think that Minchas Oved Kochavim would be different than any other mincha, or Minchas Noshim, or if a woman brings a korban mincha, I don't know why that has to be listed here. And then finally, Minchas HaOmer. Actually, Minchas HaOmer is going to be the prototype in the biblical sense of requiring both shemen and levona, because in the Minchas Omer, as we'll soon see, the Torah goes out of its way to say v'nasata oleha shemen v'samta oleha levona, and that's at the beginning of Sefer Vayikra in Perek Beis. So from the Minchas Omer, which is brought on the second day of Pesach, we're going to derive the requirement of levona, of shemen and levona for many other menachos. And now we should sort of like press the return button. Now we have a case where you require shemen but not levona, and that's minchas nesachim. So minchas nesachim is a carbon mincha that is accompanying a carbon ola, carbon shlamim, and it requires shemen and not levona. I wish I had some sort of mnemonic device, to make it easy to remember this. But we might have to just go over it and over it a million times till it sinks in. But I would only say this, that since the Minchas Nesachim already is connected to the Nesach, the Niskei Yayin, so therefore it doesn't need Lavona. Now it is a classic Mincha insofar as it requires Shemen, but Lavona is superfluous because it's connected to the oil, to the Yayin, to the wine of the Niskei Yayin. Again, that's not meaningful at all. It's just trying to sink it into my brain. Okay, now we get to the third category. And the third category is where you require lavona and not shemen. I mean, that's a chiddush of its own. Lavona is usually secondary to shemen, but here lavona becomes primary. And that's going to be lechem haponim, ta'un lavona v'ein ton shemen. Now, the Levona here in this context is what we call the Shnei Bezichen. So you may remember that when they put the lechem on the, 6 on one column and 6 on the other on Shabbos, and then the Kohen would only be allowed to eat from these 12 loaves of bread after they were maktir the Bazichen, which are the spoonfuls of Levona. So I think that's a little bit easier to remember. Again, I'm looking for memory devices. That for sure, lechem aponim requires levona. Right? We said that in Minchas Nesachim, you didn't require levona because you already had the yayin. In lechem aponim, you certainly require levona because that's the shnei bazicha that's matir the lechem. But the chiddush here is that it doesn't require shemen. Okay, now we get to the fourth category, the final category. Shtei alechem u'minchas chote, minchas knos, ein te'unim lo shemen v'lo levona. So again, if I'm looking for a mnemonic device, I would, or some sort of memory device, I would say that minchas chote, minchas knos are always like the bare minimum menachos because they have to do with chet, and therefore we drop both shemen and levona. But how do you remember that shtei alechem doesn't require? I guess, yeah, because let's say like this. These menachos, let's go back for a moment to lechem haponim and now shtei lechem. They don't go on the mizbeach at all. There's no kmitza. And therefore we would think that you don't require shemen or levona, but in the case of the lechem aponim, we say that there's a to be mated the lechem aponim, we need the haktara of the bazicha, which is levona. Okay, let's start with Omer Papa. This is the easy part of the sugya. Kol hecha desnan eser tnan. Whenever we find in the Mishnayos that the Mishnayos will list a certain number of menachos, it's always going to be the magic number is 10. And what's the significance of that? Lafuki mid Rabbi Shimon. According to Rabbi Shimon, there really are 11 menachos. Why? Because mechza chalos and mechza kikin yogim. If a person voluntarily pledges to bring a minchas ma'afeh, then according to Rabbi Shimon, he could bring half, meaning 5 out of the 10 will be chalos, and the other half will be rikikin. Whereas the Chachamim hold that it's either or. It's either a pledge to bring chalos, which are the matzos, or a pledge to be rikikin, the wafers. But you can't split it. It's not 5 and 5. So therefore, according to our Mishnah, the number, says Rav Papa, is 10, whereas according to Rabbi Shimon, it would be 11 because in addition to a mincha smafe of chalos and a minchas mafe of rikikin, we also have a minchas mafe that's half rikikin and half chalos, which sets up a new category of a mincha, and that's number 11. But Kamash Below, Papa wants to teach me that our mission is against Rabbi Shimon. Okay, now let's get back for a moment to Minchas Nesachim, which, as we said before, accompanies the Ola and the Shlomim together with the Niskei Yayin, and therefore the Yayin we said substitutes for Lavona. And then let's keep in mind also that the Shtei Alechem we said doesn't require either, neither Shemen nor Lavona, as opposed to the Lechem Aponim, which required Lavona. Okay, Tana Rabbana, we learned in a Bryce. So what we are going to study now for the remainder of Amud Aleph is Mazel Tov Baruch. I'm doing Daf Yomi now. So you know we have a girl. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you heard. Bye. Okay, I'm going to shut off my phone now because when there's a Baruch Hashem a Simcha in the family, then everybody wants to call, which is so nice. Okay. Right. So now, as I said at the outset, the Minchas HaOmer, which is brought on the second day of Pesach, becomes sort of paradigmic to teach me Levona and Shemen in Menachos, because the Torah says explicitly, with regard to the Omer, V'nasata oleh Shemen v'samta oleh Levona. So again, if we had a whiteboard, that would be the pasuk on the whiteboard. V'nasata oleha levona. Now the word oleha is a mute on it and not on another mincha. V'lo lechem aponim. Now again, lechem aponim we said requires levona, but not shemen. So now we're going to say that the word v'nasata oleha shemen. Again, we're going to have another oleha when it says v'samta oleha levona. But right now we're focused on the ratio of Nasata Oleha Shemen to the exclusion of Lechem Aponim, which doesn't require Shemen. And the reason why we need an extra pasuk to exclude Shemen in the case of the Lechem Aponim is because Sheyachal. I would think that maybe, based on the Kal V'chomer that we're about to learn, the Lechem Aponim should require Shemen. Valodinhu. Here's the Kal V'chomer. Uma Minchas Nesachim. Right? We said the Minchas Nesachim, and so again, this just used my stupid memory device, but since it comes with the Yayin, the Niskei Yayin doesn't require Levona, and yet it does require Shemen. Ma Minchas Nesachim she'ena tuna Levona tuna Shemen is Lechem Aponim. In that sense, is more chamur, so to speak, if you go up the ladder, than Minchas Nesachim, because Minchas Nesachim does not require Levona. And yet, Lechem Aponim, we said, because the Bazicha, the Shtei Bazicha requires Levona. It's a no din sheton Shemen. If Shemen is a requirement, even when there's no requirement of Levona, namely in the case of Minchas Nesachim, then in the case where we do have a requirement of Levona, and that's the case of Lechem Haponim, right? Lechem Haponim is ein din sheton shemen tamalomer oleh shemen v'lo lechem Haponim shemen. Fine. Now we go to the second half of the pasuk by Minchas HaOmer. V'samta oleh levona. Again, the word oleh is coming. Oleha is coming to as a miyut to exclude another case. Olel levona, right on the minchas omer you need levona. V'lol minchas nesachim levona. Which again, the memory device I'm using over and over again is because it accompanies the yayin. Sheyachol valodinu. I would have a kavach chomer to derive that in the case of minchas nesachim, you should certainly require shemen. Why? Uma lechem aponim she'ena tu'una shemen. One second. One second. I think I messed up here again. Let me just go over it one more time. Santo shemen. Olel levona v'lo minchas nesachim levona. Minchas nesachim does not require levona. And why would I think that minchas nesachim requires ma lechem aponim she'eno to'un shemen? Right, because the lechem aponim only requires levona, but not shemen. Is to'un levona? Is minchas nesachim she'to'una shemen? Because the only, so to speak, leniency in the case of minchas nesachim is to drop the ball on levona, but apparently otherwise it's a classic mincha that requires shemen. Is eno din shetuna levona, right? Because the lechem aponim doesn't require shemen, and yet it requires levona, which is the shnei bezichin. Then how much more so the minchas nesachim should certainly require levona because it requires shemen. Oleh levona v'lo minchas nesachim. Hence, we need this extra miut of oleh in the sefer the pasuk v'samta oleh levona to tell me that a minchas nesachim does not need levona. Now we continue in the pasuk. And I'm going to look here in the Torah or for the whole pasuk. It says v'nasata oleh shemen, referring to the Omer. V'samta oleh levona mincha hi. So there are two extra words here, mincha and he. Mincha, says the Brisa, l'rabos mincha shmini levona. This is a long discussion here, but I'm just going to summarize it very quickly. There were shmonas yimei miluim when they made a Chanukas Mishkan, and on the 8th day, which was the last day of the Shmonos Yimei Miluim, they brought a special mincha. Now that's called a mincha l'shah and not a mincha l'doros. It was only for that particular occasion. And the Brisa wants to explain that we need a special ribui to teach me that mincha on the 8th day of the miluim of the Mishkan requires levona. Okay, we'll get back to that in a minute. And then the last word in the pasuk, which was extra, lahotzi shtei alechem shelo yitenu lo shemen v'lo levona. Then the case of shtei alechem, which doesn't have a matir of bazichin, and the only matter it needs is the shnei kvasim, but as far as the mincha is concerned, it's not brought on the mizbeach, the shtei alechem, it's eaten by the kohanim, and why add shemen or levona? Shemen or levona are added to that which is brought on the mizbeach. Okay, now we get to the hard part of the sugya. Let's see. Omar Mar. We go back to the Brisa. Oleh, referring to the Minchas HaOmer, Shemen, and the Oleh is coming to exclude V'lo Lechem Aponim Shemen, because the Lechem Aponim, as we said before, only require Levona, but not Shemen. Ema, why not say something else? Oleh Shemen, V'lo Minchas Kohanim Shemen. After all, the Minchas Kohanim, we said it was Kula Kolil, completely burnt on the Mizbeach. It has its own unique dinim, so maybe it doesn't require Shemen. And the extra word Oleh in the parsha of Minchas HaOmer is to exclude Shemen in the case of Minchas Kohanim. Now, if we go back to the Mishnah for a second, what do we know about Minchas Kohanim? It requires both Shemen and Levon. But maybe we should exclude Shemen based on the Oleha of Shemen in the Minchas Omer. And the Gemara says, Mistabra, Minchas Kohanim, Havile Ribuye. It makes sense that Minchas Kohanim should require Shemen. Why? Shekain, because it is very similar to the Omer in the following ways: Isaron, Kli, Chutz, Tsura, Hagasha, Ve'ishim. So again, we could probably spend an hour just on that line, but let's just very quickly go through it. The requirement of Minchas Kohanim is classic in the sense that it requires an Isaron, and also the Mincha has to be put into a Kli Shares, and Chutz Oh yeah, so this is a little confusing. Usually where chutz means outside the Azora, here chutz means outside of the Heichal, in the Azora. Vitsura. Okay, so this is really complicated. Tsura is referring to what's called Lina, because in the perspective of Kodshim, when you leave a korban beyond its allotted time period, it loses its appearance. So that's called Surah. But anyway, what we're talking about is Lina. And finally, Hagasha. Right? There's a separate halacha of Hagasha with regard to Menachos, and the Minchas Kohanim requires Hagasha. So Gemara is not happy with this. Adarabba. I'm going to give you a whole list of similarities between the Lechem Aponim and the Minchas HaOmer. So that therefore, when the Torah is excluding Shemen, maybe it's excluding Shemen in the case of Lechem Aponim. No, I'm sorry. Just let me get that straight. No, I'm sorry. What we said was that the Oleha as a miut in Minchas HaOmer excludes Lechem Aponim. Lechem Aponim do not require Shemen. And now the Gemara is saying, but why do you say so? Maybe it's coming to exclude Minchas Kohanim. Okay, so you said that Minchas Kohanim is very similar to the Omer, and therefore it's logical that it should require Shemen. Well, I'm going to argue that the Lechem Aponim is very similar to the Omer in the following ways, and therefore it should require Shemen. Shekain, Tzibura. Okay, let's go one by one. Lechem Aponim is a korban tzibur. It's not an individual korban. Whereas Minchas Kohanim is an individual korban. Chova, right? The Lechem Aponim every Shabbos has to be put on the so it's an obligation. It's not like Minchas Kohanim, which is a nedava. Tameh. Oh, so what's Tameh? That the tzitz is maratza, and therefore even if the Lechem Aponim contracted tumah, nevertheless you would still bring the Lechem Aponim, which is not going to be the case for the Minchas Kohanim. The Achil, right? Lechem Aponim is eaten by the Kohanim. Every Shabbos they get to 12 and they divide it up. But Minchas Kohanim is completely kolil, completely burnt. Pigula. And if you have machshava chutz mano, in the case of the Lechem Aponim, then it becomes pigul. Now that was a little bit of a chiddush for me. I don't remember that we... I got it. Right. Now we go back to the sugyas of pigul, which were very challenging, and we said that pigul only applies when there's a matir. So in the case of Minchas Kohanim, which is kulo kol, is completely burnt, there's no matir. But there's a great similarity between the Minchas HaOmer and the Minchas, and the Lechem Aponim, because they both have a matir. So in the case of, what's the matir in the case of Minchas HaOmer? I guess it's the Kmitza. A Kmitza and Haktor al Gabi Mizbeach. In the case of lechem aponim, we need the matir, the bazichin. And therefore both lechem aponim as Minchas Omer are subject to pigul. B'Shabsa, and yet we override the Shabbos in the case of Minchas Omer. So if the Minchas Omer was the second day of Pesach overlaps with Shabbos, fell on Shabbos, then you'll bring the Minchas Omer and you'll override the Shabbos. And that means that you'll burn the komets. You'll burn the komets on the Mizbeach. Now, why would what does it mean the lechem aponim overrides the Shabbos? That I don't got. What avera, what violation of Shabbos applies to the lechem aponim? So I think here we're going to go with the Rashash, even though it's not Rashi, and he says that we're talking about the burning of the levona, right? We said that lechem aponim requires bazichin, which are the 2 spoons of the levona that have to be burnt on the mizbech, and that's going to override Shabbos. But in the case of Minchas Kohanim, which is a private nidava of a yachid, we don't override the Shabbos. So again, now we're stuck because we said that the Oleh Shemen is not coming to exclude Minchas Kohanim because of the various similarities between Minchas Kohanim and the Minchas HaOmer. But now we're saying, well, why do you want to exclude Lechem HaPanim? There are so many similarities between Lechem HaPanim and Minchas HaOmer. And the more answers, and this answer is going to come up over and over again in the Sugya, Mistabra Nefesh, meaning when the Torah refers to the Menachos, it uses the word Nefesh. And he tells you that that's at the beginning of Vayikra. So Nefesh means an individual. And the word Nefesh, an individual, is paradigmic of Shemen and Levona, meaning your classic mincha, given Minchas HaOmer, is accompanied, mixed with Shemen, and requires Levona to be placed on the mincha. And therefore, in Minchas Kohanim, which is very similar because it's nefesh, meaning it's got that essential quality of a mincha, that it's a personal, individual mincha, then therefore it's going to require, like the Omer, both Shemen and Levona. But that's not going to include Lechem HaPanim because Lechem HaPanim is not nefesh. It's a communal obligation, and therefore we're going to use the Oleh to exclude Lechem HaPanim from Shemen. Shemen for Lechem HaPanim. Omar Mar, Oleh, now we go to the second part of the pasuk in the Brisa, Levona Vilol Minchas Nesachim Levona. And again, the memory device for me is that Minchas Nesachim comes with the Niskei Ayayin, and therefore you don't need this beautiful aroma of the frankincense. And the Gemara says that in the case of Minchas HaOmer, you require Levona in the end of the pasuk, but Oleh Levona means to the exclusion of Minchas Nisachim. So the Gemara asks, why not suggest Ema that Oleh Levona V'lo Minchas Kohanim Levona? Maybe when we drop the requirement to Levona, maybe we should do so in the case of Minchas Kohanim. And Minchas Kohanim, as we said, is a unique carbon because it's a mincha that's kuli kolil. And yet the law of Minchas Kohanim, like all the other menachos, is that it requires both Shemen and Levona. And the Gemara says, Mistabra Minchas Kohanim Havilil Rebuye. On the contrary, Minchas Kohanim has so much of a similarity to the Omer. Just 1 second. Is it the exact same list? Yeah, it's the exact same list. Is Isaron Bolul Belug Mugash Biglal et just 1 second. I thought we could move on, but I see that All right, so let's go through this again. The volume of flour for Minchas Kohanim, like any other mincho, like Minchas Omer, is Isaron. Bowl means that you add Shem and you mix it with the flour. Bilog, meaning that we need a log of shemen to be added. Mugash means it's agosha. Now, what's biglal and etzem? Let's see what biglal is. Biglal, right? As opposed to what? As opposed to because minchas nesachim, as we said before, is an accompaniment to another carbon. Not so in the case of minchas kohanim. Minchas kohanim doesn't accompany any carbon; it's in and of itself. That's called biglal etzem. So I think biglal etzem should be read as one phrase. Oh, so now the Gemara is going to say, on the contrary, you want to exclude minchas nesachim and tell me that minchas nesachim does not require levona. I'm going to tell you, Adarab, let's include minchas nesachim in the equation to minchas omer because there's so many similarities between minchas nesachim and minchas omer. And what are they? Shekain, tzibura. Okay, the minchas nesachim. Wait a minute. Why is minchas nesachim tzibura? Oh boy, now I messed up. Why is minchas nesachim tzibura? Because the minchas nesachim sometimes is tzibura. When is the minchas nesachim tzibura? So we're not talking about an individual who volunteered with an adava to bring minchas nesachim, but rather minchas nesachim that accompanied the carbon tamid every day. And therefore the minchas nesachim is considered like part of the carbon tamid, and therefore it's a carbon tzibur. Chova, and once again, this is a requirement to bring minchas nesachim together with the tamid, as opposed to minchas kohanim, which is not a chovas tzibur, nor is it a chov at all. It's all voluntary. V'itmei, and not only that, with regard to the minchas nesachim that accompanies the tzibur, we have the tzitz that's maratz al atuma and b'shabsa, and just like the carbon tamid on the seventh day of the week overrides the Shabbos, so too will the mincha, what's called the minchas nesachim that accompanies the carbon tamid, also will override the Shabbos. And again, the Gemara is going to give the same answer, mistaber nefesh, right? We don't want to generate a similarity between the minchas nesachim and the korban omer to the exclusion of minchas kohanim. No, we'd rather include minchas kohanim in the requirement of shemen and levona. Now we're talking about levona because it's a nefesh. Nefesh meaning it's an individual mincha, as opposed to minchas nesachim, which is brought with the carbon tamid that has the status of a tzibur. Next. The Brisa says mincha. What was that extra word mincha? L'rabos minchas shmini levona. Affecting Gemara of the emel lahotzi. Maybe on the contrary, maybe the Torah is telling you that the minchas shmini doesn't require levona, and that's why it says mincha. Mincha to exclusion of a different kind of mincha that was a one-time mincha. And the Gemara answers no. Hi my. I can do away with the explanation that you had a havamina that maybe the minchas yom shmini does not require levona, and therefore I need a rebuild of levona, and the Gemara is going to explain that. Ella iyamit lahotzi lamali. Why would you want to exclude levona from this mincha? After all, shami doris lo yalfinon. Right, this was a mincha l'shah. Right, and therefore, I never would have assumed that a mincha l'shah requires levona. I would assume just bring the mincha without a levona. And we can't derive levona from any other mincha because we're dealing with a mincha l'shah. And therefore, if we have an extra word mincha, it makes more sense l'rabos shapir. That it's coming to tell you that even though you never would have guessed and assume that a minchas shmini would require levona, I want to tell you a chiddush that it requires levona. Now, the last word in the pasuk by Minchas HaOmer, which we were darshaning in the brisa, was who? Well, actually, he. I should read lahotzi shtei alechem, and that means that the shtei alechem, insofar as they don't go on the mizbeach, they don't require neither shemen nor levona. Shelo yitanu lo shemen levona. Frek the Gemara aim lahotzi minchas kohen. Again, we can go through this whole rigmarole again. Maybe what's the miud here of he is coming to exclude minchas kohen because again, minchas kohen is so unique in that it's kuli kolil. And the answer is v'staber minchas kohen have a little buye. There's a certain similarity between minchas kohenim and the Korban Omer, Shekein Isoran Kli Matzah ve'etzem ve'hagosha ve'ishim. And now again the Gemara is going to say Adarabba. Maybe the Shtei Alechem has a greater similarity to the Korban Omer, the Minchas Omer, and therefore I would dafka want to include the Shtei Alechem in the requirements of Shemen and Levona. Why do you exclude it? It's so similar to Omer, it should logically be included. And if you'll tell me, well, there's a great similarity to Minchas Kohanim, I'm going to tell you no, that there's more of a similarity between the Omer and the Shtei Alechem than there is between the Omer and the Minchas Kohanim.